I first saw her hand before I saw her face. It came up through the blowing snow, small and bare, counting. One finger, then another, then another. A child standing in a whiteout, counting children beside a road where no child had any business being. I was riding south from Miller's sale yard with less money than I needed, and more anger than was useful. The bay under me was tired. My coat was frozen stiff along the shoulders. I had been thinking about my own troubles so hard. I nearly made them the only troubles in the world. Then I saw 6 shapes by the wash road. No wagon, no lantern, no grown man, no woman. Just 6 children backed against the wind like fence posts trying not to fall. The oldest was a girl in a brown coat too thin for that kind of weather. 10 years old, maybe 11, if hunger had made her look smaller. She had one little boy pressed against her hip, one arm across him. And with the other hand, she kept counting the rest. Not crying, not waving, counting. I pulled the horse up, and the whole group went still. Children know the difference between rescue and danger less often than grown men think. They do not run toward every rider, not when life has already taught them that a stranger can be either door. I swung down slow, keeping my hands where they could see them. "Where are your people?" I asked. The girl stared at me, then passed me down the road, as if the right answer might still be coming through the snow. "Our father went to the Weatherby place," she said. "For a wagon." She looked at the little boy under her arm before she answered. "Before the light changed." That was enough. In a storm like that, before the light changed could mean an hour. It could mean 4. The smallest child's mouth had gone gray around the edges. One of the boys had stopped shivering, which frightened me more than if he had been shaking apart. The wind had packed ice in the girl's hair until it looked like white thread. "I have one horse, one bedroll, and enough sense to know this road is trying to kill you." She did not smile. Good. A smiling child in that weather would have scared me. I put the smallest boy in the saddle first. His name was Samuel, though he could barely say it through his teeth. That was the first thing I noticed. They were not obeying me. They were obeying her. There was a line camp cabin a little less than a mile back, used by cattle hands when they pushed beeves through the lower pass. I had passed it that morning and paid it no mind. The way a man ignores shelter when he thinks he will not need it. Now it was the only thing in the world that mattered. We started back into the storm. The road had nearly vanished. Snow came sideways, sharp as ground glass. I kept one hand on the reins and the other on Samuel's coat to keep him upright. The children walked close to the horse, each one holding a sleeve or a belt. Ruth stayed at the rear. Every 20 steps, she counted, 1 by the horse, 2 by the stirrup. 3 behind the bay's hip, 4 at her side. 5 under the saddle blanket. 6. Then she would lift her chin and walk again. I wanted to tell her I had them now. I wanted to tell her she could stop being the wall. But that would have been a lie. In that storm, nobody had anybody. Not fully. All we had was the next 10 yards, and the hope that the cabin had not been torn open by the wind. Halfway there, the boy named Peter went down. Not dramatic. Not with a cry. Too small, too cold, too late. I handed Samuel down to one of the older boys, grabbed Peter under the arms, and got him moving. Ruth did not thank me. She only touched Peter's face, checked his eyes, and counted again. That was when I understood what the storm had made of her. Not brave. She was responsible. The line cabin appeared out of the white like a dark tooth. The door was jammed with snow. I kicked it until the latch gave, and we spilled inside with the wind following us. The place smelled of old smoke, mouse dust, and cold iron. There was a pot-bellied stove, a cracked coffee tin, half a sack of beans, and a pile of kindling someone had been decent enough to leave dry. I got a fire going with shaking hands. For a while nobody spoke except the stove. It ticked, it sighed. Then it caught, and the first real heat came into that little room like mercy. I stripped wet mittens off fingers that had gone red and waxy. I wrapped Samuel in my bedroll. I set Peter close enough to warm but not close enough to burn. Ruth stood by the door until I realized she was still counting the shapes on the floor. "Ruth," I said. She looked at me. "They're all inside." Her mouth moved once, like she wanted to believe me, but did not know how to take my word for it. Then she counted them anyway. Only after the sixth did she sit. I made beans thin enough to pour and hot enough to matter. They ate like children who had been told not to ask for more, even when they needed it. Ruth gave her cup to Samuel until I put a second cup in her hand, and told her it was not a negotiation. She drank it. Then she began to shake. That is the part most people forget about fear. It often waits until there is room for it. I was not the sort of man people sent for when children needed gentleness. I had a temper that had cost me work, friends, and nearly my marriage before fever took my wife and left me with no one to apologize to. I knew horses. I knew bad weather. I knew how to pull a calf backward out of a breech berth and how to sit silent beside a dying mule. Children were a country I had never learned the map of, but I had stopped, and stopping had made the rest of it mine. By dark, the storm had worsened. The cabin walls bowed and creaked. Snow hissed through one bad seam by the window. The children slept in a huddle near the stove, Ruth closest to the door even in sleep, as if her body had chosen its post and would not abandon it. I had my revolver halfway out before I saw his face. He was iced from hat brim to beard, eyes wide and empty with the kind of panic that has already pictured the worst. He stepped in, saw the children, and stopped like a rope had been thrown around his chest. "Ruth," he said. The girl woke at his voice. For a moment, nobody moved. Then she got up, crossed the cabin, and put one hand against his coat. "They're here, Papa," she said. "I kept them. That broke him." Not loudly. Not the way songs make men break. His knees bent, and he sat down right there in the snowmelt by the door, covering his face with both hands. I closed the door against the wind. He told me later his name was Gideon Vale. Their wagon had split a front wheel in the rut wash just before the storm turned. He had left the children in the road because the Weatherby farm was supposed to be 2 miles north and full of men. But the Weatherbys had gone to winter with kin, and their house was shut. Gideon had pushed farther, then lost the road, then lost his horse in a drift, then walked back by fence line in prayer. "I should not have left them," he said. No one argued. There are some truths a man must carry without someone trying to make them lighter. I put another stick in the stove. The night became long. Gideon sat awake against the wall, watching his children sleep. Ruth slept only in pieces. Every time the wind struck hard, her eyes opened and moved across the room, counting. Near morning, when the storm had tired itself into a low moan, I said to him, "She counted them the whole way here." He looked at me. "Every few steps," I said. "She gets that from her mother," he said. I did not ask where the mother was. The answer was already in the way Ruth wore responsibility like an inherited coat. At first light, the world outside had turned clean and cruel. Snow lay over the wash road deep enough to hide the ruts that had started all of it. Gideon found his horse alive near a cottonwood, reins frozen to the brush. We split the children between the two horses and walked most of the way, because no animal should carry too much after a night like that. Samuel talked once the sun touched his face. He told me he had a red marble in his pocket, and that Peter snored like a saw. Peter denied it. The girls laughed, small and rusty, as if laughter were something they had stored away and were now testing for damage. Ruth did not laugh, but she walked beside me for a while. At the fork where my road turned south and theirs ran east toward Mercy Bend, Gideon stopped. He took off one glove and held out his hand. There was gratitude in it. Not at the road. At me. Then she counted her brothers and sisters one more time, turned east, and disappeared into the brightness. I have forgotten many things since then. Prices, faces, the names of men who cheated me and men I cheated by being proud. But I have not forgotten that hand in the snow. One finger, then another, then another. I have not forgotten that I almost rode past it. That is the part that has stayed with me longest. Not that I stopped, but that for several yards I was still deciding whether 6 freezing children were my business. A man can make almost any wrong thing sound reasonable if he gives himself enough road. I was lucky the road ran out, because some chances do not announce themselves as chances. Sometimes they look like trouble and bad weather. Sometimes they look like someone else's child, counting what the world has already begun to lose.